control this courtroom, not you!
Then fear the judge. She's my wife.
The taser cracked before the gavel could. That sound, sharp, metallic, and wrong, split the courtroom silence into chaos. My daughter's chair jolted, her small hand twitching as sparks danced too close to the metal frame of her wheelchair. Gasps filled the air, a mother's scream. My own pulse became thunder. And at the center of it stood Valerie Kent, the HOA's board chair, the self-anointed queen of control, her hand trembling just enough to betray the smug confidence on her painted smile. She was in violation, she hissed, trying to mask her panic behind authority. The enforcer in crimson didn't realize yet what she'd just done, or who she'd done it to. I took one step forward, my voice calm but cold. "Violation?" I said softly. "You just committed assault in a federal courtroom. If you've ever seen power cross a line, hit subscribe now, because this story will hit back harder." Valerie Kent, the board chair who believed she owned more than her title, stood outside the courtroom steps surrounded by her entourage of clipboard loyalists. Even from across the marble hall, I could hear her voice cutting through the air, sharp and defensive. "The device discharged accidentally," she barked. "He provoked it. I followed protocol." Protocol. The word tasted like poison. The enforcer in crimson had weaponized that word for years, using it to justify intimidation, fines, and threats against anyone who dared challenge her version of order. Today, that same word might bury her. I stopped just short of the exit and turned to the bailiff. "Make sure evidence retention gets that taser to city forensics tonight. Chain of custody starts now." My tone left no room for misunderstanding. Years in federal compliance made me fluent in the language of consequence. He nodded. "Yes, sir." My daughter rested her head against my arm, her voice soft. "Dad, is she going to be in trouble?" I looked down at her, so small, so strong despite what happened. "Not yet," I said, "but she will be." Behind me, the clipboard queen strutted down the steps, sunglasses on despite the fading daylight. She thrived on optics, always trying to control the frame, even when it was collapsing. Two local reporters hovered nearby, drawn by the chaos, their cameras half raised. Valerie turned on them instantly. This was a misunderstanding. The Rourkes have been in non-compliance for months. That's when I stepped into frame, calm, cold, deliberate. "Would you like me to quote the section of ADA compliance she violated, or should we wait for the press release?" Her jaw twitched. The microphones turned toward me instead. The tyrant in heels had lost the spotlight, and she knew it. "You're manipulating this," she hissed under her breath. "Am I?" I said quietly. "You fired a weapon in front of witnesses. I'm simply letting the law describe what happened." Her mask cracked, just for a moment. Then she straightened, forcing a confident smirk. "You think your wife being a judge gives you an edge? It doesn't. The HOA operates independently. Never let anger show its teeth until it's ready to bite." I leaned closer. "It's funny how people who hide behind rules forget what happens when those rules are turned inside out." She stepped back, the sound of her heels clapping across the marble echoing louder than her voice. The officer of rules had just realized she was standing inside a system she couldn't manipulate. A flash from a camera caught the moment. Her retreat, my daughter's burned wheelchair rim, the courthouse looming behind us. That image would end up everywhere by morning. But for now, I wanted one thing: accountability. Rebecca joined me at the base of the steps, still in her robe, but calm as steel. "They'll start damage control by tonight," she murmured. "Expect statements, spin, maybe even an apology." "I don't want her apology," I said. "I want her pattern exposed." "Then we do it right," Rebecca said. "By the book." The phrase hung in the air between us, deliberate. By the book had always been our shared language, two professionals who built careers on precision and patience. It's also what made us dangerous to people like Valerie Kent. That night, while the neighborhood scrolled through gossip threads and half-baked rumors, I sat at my desk reviewing archived HOA audits. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't her first abuse of authority. It was just the first time she'd aimed it at the wrong family. 3 past incidents stood out: misused HOA funds, falsified maintenance invoices, and a noise violation, fine issued to a deaf veteran. Each one reeked of power unchecked. The enforcer in crimson had built an empire of paper shields and legal bluffs, and now those shields were about to turn into evidence. I looked over at my daughter sleeping on the couch, the faint blue light of her night monitor glowing against her cast. My resolve hardened. "You took a shot at my family," I whispered. "Now the law will take one at you." Because when someone like Valerie Kent mistakes silence for surrender, she never sees the storm coming until it's already overhead. By the next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing like a nest I'd just struck with a stick. Word of what Valerie Kent had done inside the courthouse spread faster than any official statement ever could. Still, the board chair wasn't retreating. She was regrouping. At sunrise, I saw her car, that black SUV with the HOA emblem she had custom printed, parked outside my gate. She stood beside it, clipboard in hand, tapping her pen like she was rehearsing for control. The enforcer in crimson never believed in rest. She believed in retaliation. When I stepped outside with my coffee, she didn't waste time. "Mr. Rourke," she called out, her tone falsely polite. "Given yesterday's misunderstanding, the board has voted to revisit your property's accessibility additions." My jaw tightened. "Revisit? You mean erase?" Her lips curled. "Let's just say we'd prefer the neighborhood maintain visual harmony." Visual harmony. That was her favorite phrase. Her way of dressing discrimination in designer language. She scribbled something onto her clipboard, the same one she'd clutched in court, and handed me a notice. "You're to remove that ramp by Friday. Otherwise, you'll face cumulative penalties and—" I cut her off. "You want to cite the law? Then start with Federal Statute 42 U.S. Code, paragraph 1/182. You violated it." She blinked, thrown by the precision of it, but tried to recover. "This is a private community. We enforce our own—" "You enforce fear," I said, and yesterday proved it. The clipboard queen faltered just slightly before masking it with a tight smile. "You can posture all you like, Mr. Rourke, but people around here prefer order to pity. That's why they elect me." Behind her words, there it was. The subtle tremor of someone who was losing control but refusing to admit it. I leaned against the railing, calm but firm. "If you're so confident, tell me, Valerie, what happens when the people who elected you finally see who you really are?" Her eyes flicked to my porch camera, the one I'd installed years ago, now blinking red, recording everything. "That's intimidation," she snapped. "No," I said softly. "That's evidence." For a brief second, her mask cracked. The tyrant in heels turned away, her posture rigid. "This neighborhood doesn't need your kind of drama," she muttered, marching back toward her SUV. But before she reached it, another voice stopped her, one she hadn't expected. "Maybe it does." It was Martha Lane, one of the longest-serving board members, and the one person who'd looked sick to her stomach during the courthouse chaos. The conflicted witness. Her face was pale, her arms crossed tight over her chest. "Valerie," she said quietly, "people are talking about the taser, about what really happened in that courtroom." The officer of rules spun around, fury tightening her voice. "They'll talk about what I tell them to talk about." Martha didn't flinch. Her gaze shifted toward me. "I saw the footage, Michael. The way she reacted after, the look on her face. She knew exactly what she was doing." Valerie froze. "You're out of line, Martha." "No," Martha replied, voice shaking but steady. "You are." The silence that followed was heavy, sharp, electric. Valerie's jaw clenched, her nails dug into her clipboard. "You think anyone will take your word over mine?" she hissed. Martha looked down at the ground. "Maybe not yet," she said, "but give them time." And with that, she turned and walked off, leaving the enforcer in crimson standing there, her composure splintering in real time. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Valerie's eyes met mine one last time, and for the first time since this began, she looked uncertain. As she drove away, her SUV's reflection caught the morning light, red flashing across the chrome like warning fire. I took it as a sign. Inside, my daughter was still asleep. Her small wheelchair sat near the window, its frame gleaming in the sun. That ramp, the one Valerie wanted gone, was more than a modification. It was freedom. And if the clipboard queen thought she could erase that symbol, she hadn't learned a damn thing from yesterday. Because she hadn't just picked a fight with a homeowner, she'd picked a fight with a family built on justice, and one with more reach, patience, and precision than she could possibly imagine. And thanks to Martha Lane's flicker of courage, Valerie Kent's empire was beginning to crack, one whispered truth at a time. By Thursday morning, the storm had moved from whispers to headlines. The HOA board's private squabbles were now public property. Local news anchors were tossing Valerie Kent's name around like a headline grenade. HOA chair accused of assaulting disabled child. But while the rest of the city digested the shock, the board chair herself was preparing for counterattack. She didn't hide. She never did. That was Valerie's brand of arrogance. She called it confidence. When I saw her striding toward my driveway that morning, heels clicking like gunfire on concrete, clipboard in one hand, coffee in the other, I knew she was ready to rewrite the narrative. The enforcer in crimson stood at the edge of my property line, chin high, sunglasses reflecting the morning sun. "Mr. Rourke," she said smoothly, "I suggest we talk privately before this goes any further. Things have gotten out of hand." I stepped out onto the porch, arms folded. "You mean the part where you used a taser on a child? Or the part where you called it community enforcement?" Her expression flickered, just for a second. Then that fake composure snapped back in place. "You're twisting the facts," she said. "You're exploiting an unfortunate accident for attention." "Attention?" I said quietly. "You think I want my daughter's name dragged through the media just to teach you a lesson?" The clipboard queen didn't blink. She always had this way of talking like she was the victim of her own cruelty, an art form she'd perfected in years of HOA politics. "I built this neighborhood's reputation," she said. "I won't let your vendetta destroy it." "That's the problem, Valerie," I replied. "You didn't build this neighborhood. You built control." Her smirk thinned. "And yet, control keeps chaos from spreading, something you, of all people, should appreciate, officer." The word officer hit with calculated venom. She'd done her homework. She knew my service history, my position, the discipline it took to stay calm under pressure. She was trying to provoke me into a reaction, to turn authority into rage, to twist duty into guilt. I gave her nothing. Just silence. The kind that unnerves bullies more than shouting ever could. She glanced at the ramp again, the one she'd demanded I remove. "I'll make this simple," she said, lowering her tone. "You remove that ramp voluntarily, and I'll ensure no further penalties are issued. Refuse, and I'll pursue enforcement through our legal counsel." "You mean the same counsel that's now under review for conflict of interest?" Her posture stiffened. "You don't have proof." Yet, the tyrant in heels tried to recover by flipping through her clipboard pages, pretending authority still meant something. "Your modifications were unauthorized," she snapped. "Your conduct unbecoming. This will not end well for you." I took a slow step forward, my shadow crossing the border between our properties. "You're right about one thing," I said. "It won't end well, for you." Something in my tone must have landed because, for once, she had no response. Her hand trembled slightly as she clutched the clipboard closer, the same way she'd clutched that taser in court. That's when Martha Lane appeared again. She stood halfway down the street, hesitant but watching. The conflicted witness hadn't spoken publicly since her quiet standoff with Valerie earlier in the week, but the look on her face told me she'd made a decision. Valerie noticed her too. "Go home, Martha," she barked. "This doesn't concern you." "It does," Martha said softly. "Because I was on the board when you filed that motion to review accessibility installations. You knew exactly what you were targeting." The officer of rules went still, then turned her fury toward Martha. "Careful what you admit to," she said. "You're implicating yourself." "I'm already implicated," Martha replied, "but at least I'm done being silent." The air between them crackled, heavy and hot. For the first time, Valerie Kent looked cornered, not by law, not by me, but by the truth closing in from someone who'd once stood beside her. She turned back to me with a brittle smile. "You've made enemies, Mr. Rourke, the kind that don't forgive." "I don't need forgiveness," I said evenly. "I need accountability." She spun on her heel, storming toward her car, the enforcer in crimson cracking under her own facade. Her SUV door slammed shut, the echo bouncing off the cul-de-sac like a warning shot. I exhaled slowly, watching her taillights vanish down the street. Beside me, Rebecca's voice broke the silence from the doorway. "She's running scared," she said quietly. "Not yet," I murmured. "But she will." Because that's the thing about power. It never just collapses. It corrodes first. And by the look of Valerie Kent's shaking hands, the corrosion had already begun. That night, the storm hit. Not the kind that rumbled through clouds, but the kind that tore through reputation. Every news outlet, every HOA forum, every neighborhood chat lit up with the same video. Valerie Kent, the board chair, standing in that courtroom as the taser sparked, my daughter's cry echoing beneath marble ceilings. Someone had leaked the footage, and it spread like gasoline meeting fire. By dawn, the enforcer in crimson was everywhere. Her name trending, her face frozen mid-denial, the frame capturing the exact moment her power cracked. But if there's one thing I've learned about people like Valerie, it's that they don't crumble quietly. They retaliate in silence first. I woke up to the hum of my phone vibrating off the kitchen counter. Notifications poured in, emails from city officials, calls from journalists, even a few from angry residents demanding the full story. But the one message that caught my eye wasn't from the public. It was from the HOA itself. Emergency board session, attendance mandatory. That was Valerie's play, damage control disguised as procedure. Rebecca looked over from the dining table, her laptop open. "You're going?" I nodded. "She's trying to rewrite the timeline. I'm not giving her that chance." By noon, I was walking into the community hall, a sterile room that smelled like disinfectant and deceit. Valerie sat at the head of the long oak table, posture straight, expression carved from glass. The clipboard queen had swapped her crimson blazer for navy today, but it didn't soften her. If anything, it made her look colder, sharper. "Mr. Rourke," she said, as if nothing had happened. "Glad you could join us. Please, sit." I didn't. "Before we start, this meeting is being recorded," I said, placing my phone on the table. Her lips twitched. "Of course, transparency is important." A lie wrapped in silk. The other members shifted uneasily. I caught Martha Lane's eyes, nervous, conflicted, but she gave me the faintest nod. The tyrant in heels glanced around the table like a general scanning her troops before battle. "As you're all aware," she began, "yesterday's incident has been grossly misrepresented online. My actions were in defense of community safety." I cut her off. "You tased a child, Valerie." A ripple moved through the room. Her jaw locked, but she pressed on, ignoring the interruption. "Mr. Rourke's installation violated Section 18B of property modifications, creating an obstruction that posed risk to others." "An accessibility ramp," I said. "You mean an accessibility ramp?" Her eyes flashed. "You may use whatever term you like. The point is, the modification wasn't approved." "That's because you buried the request," I shot back. "Twice. And when I appealed, you labeled it non-conforming." Martha cleared her throat. "He's right. I saw the file." The officer of rules turned to her sharply. "You saw part of the file." "No," Martha said, steadying her voice. "I saw the full record. You edited the timestamps." The silence was brutal. The room froze around that sentence. Valerie's hand trembled slightly on her pen. Then she leaned back, forcing a bitter smile. "Careful, Martha. Accusations without evidence are defamation." "That's rich," I said, coming from the woman who called a disabled child a security threat in a private email. That landed. Her pupils dilated, her breath caught. For the first time, she didn't speak. I continued, voice calm but low. "You left your metadata on that email, Valerie. You think deleting a message erases the truth? I taught evidence analysis to police cadets for 8 years. You're not half as clever as you think." Her facade cracked. The enforcer in crimson stared at me, pure venom simmering under the surface. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "No," I said. "I'm documenting one." Behind her, 2 board members whispered, their faces pale. Even her usual defenders looked uneasy now. The air in the room was changing. Control was bleeding from her grip, drip by drip. Valerie tried to pivot. "Mr. Rourke, you're emotional. Understandable, given your family's situation. But this meeting is about governance, not grievances." "Then govern," I said. "Vote on whether you believe she acted within policy. Because the city attorney's watching this recording as we speak." Her eyes widened, panic flashing before pride buried it. You wouldn't dare. I already did, I said, and that was before the media called. The clipboard queen rose from her seat, slamming her folder shut. Meeting adjourned, she snapped. No, Martha said quietly. It isn't. Valerie's eyes whipped toward her, but the damage was done. The vote was no longer hers to control. And as I walked out of that room, I didn't need to look back to know the truth. The tyrant in heels had just lost her kingdom, and she was too proud to realize it yet. By the time the sun went down that night, I knew Valerie Kent wasn't finished. The board chair was a woman who survived off control. Take it away, and she'd start inventing new ways to steal it back. That's exactly what she did. At 8:47 p.m., my security cameras caught her car pulling up outside my driveway again. The enforcer in crimson had changed her armor, black blazer this time, hair perfectly pulled back, clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. She didn't knock. She just stood there, staring at the ramp she'd sworn to destroy, her jaw tightening every few seconds. I stepped outside before she could raise her hand to the doorbell. You really can't help yourself. Can you? Her tone was calm, too calm. You've made a serious error, Mr. Rourke. Do you have any idea how dangerous it is to threaten a sitting board chair on record? I folded my arms. I didn't threaten you, Valerie. I exposed you. Her lips curled into a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. Expose me? To whom? A few angry neighbors? The internet moves on faster than your righteous outrage? Maybe, I said, but the city attorney doesn't. That flicker of fear came back, just a glint in her eyes, but she hid it quickly. You don't have jurisdiction here. This is a private community. Then maybe you shouldn't have used public property to issue private punishments. The clipboard queen shifted her weight, glancing at my camera again. You always recording, officer? Must be exhausting living like that. So suspicious, so defensive. Old habit, I said. Good one, too. You never know who might show up with a taser. Her cheeks flushed. She stepped closer. That footage won't hold in court. It'll get buried. Not when it's already in 3 newsrooms and the police union's inbox. The mask slipped. For a moment, she wasn't the powerful HOA leader anymore. She was just a woman realizing her empire was shrinking one headline at a time. But then she straightened her spine again. You'll regret this, she hissed. You think a few reporters make you untouchable? You don't know how many people owe me favors. Then start calling them, I said, because your clock's ticking. The tyrant in heels froze, calculating her next move. Her silence said everything. She wasn't fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for survival. Just then, the porch light from across the street flicked on. Martha Lane stood there, arms crossed, a faint tremor in her hands. Valerie, she called out, you're trespassing. Valerie turned sharply. Stay out of this, Martha. No, Martha said, voice steadier now. Not this time. The 2 women stared at each other, former allies turned enemies, and I could feel the balance finally shifting. Valerie's gaze darted between us, her confidence eroding by the second. You think siding with him will save you? She sneered at Martha. You signed off on half those violations yourself. I did, Martha admitted, and I'll testify to every one of them, but I won't lie for you again. The officer of rules froze, eyes narrowing. You'll regret that, she whispered. Maybe, Martha said, but at least I'll sleep. Something inside Valerie snapped then. Her voice rose, shrill and sharp. You both think you're heroes, but you're just bitter failures living off excuses. This neighborhood was perfect until people like you brought your chaos here. I took a step forward, lowering my voice. No, Valerie, it was perfect until people like you believed rules were weapons. Knight stared at me for a long moment, her breathing shallow, her jaw tight. Then, without another word, she stormed back toward her car. The enforcer in crimson slammed the door, tires screeching as she sped away down the quiet suburban street. The silence she left behind was heavier than thunder. Martha let out a shaky breath. She's unraveling, she said. She's cornered, I corrected. And cornered people do stupid things. I glanced toward my daughter's window, soft light glowing from within, her small shadow moving inside. That was why I couldn't let this die down. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protection. Inside, Rebecca waited by the kitchen table, phone in hand. I spoke with someone, she said quietly. A reporter from Channel 9. They want to meet tomorrow. Perfect, I said. Let's give them the truth, with receipts. She hesitated. And if Valerie comes after us again? I looked out at the empty street where the clipboard queen's taillights had vanished. Then we make sure her next move buries her for good. And in that moment, I realized something. Valerie Kent hadn't just attacked a child. She'd awakened a family that knew exactly how to dismantle corruption, one lawful strike at a time. The clock was still ticking, and I intended to make every second count. By Friday morning, the whole neighborhood felt different. The usual calm suburban rhythm had been replaced with a quiet tension, one that hummed under every polite smile and half-open curtain. Everyone had seen the footage, everyone knew about the taser, but no one dared to say her name aloud. No one except me, Valerie Kent. The board chair still held her meetings, still sent her emails, still signed every letter with that same self-righteous tone. But her authority had a crack in it now, and that crack was spreading fast. When I pulled into the cul-de-sac after my shift that morning, I saw her car parked outside Martha Lane's home. The enforcer in crimson was leaning against her SUV, arms crossed, posture tight. Her expression said one thing, panic disguised as poise. I stayed in my truck, engine running, and watched. Martha stood in her doorway, clutching a stack of papers. Her shoulders trembled, but she didn't back down. "Those are private board documents," Valerie snapped, stepping closer. "You can't just take them." Martha's voice shook, but she held her ground. "They're records, Valerie. Public under state HOA statute. I checked." The clipboard queen froze for half a second, just long enough for me to see it. She hadn't expected Martha to fight back. I got out of the truck. "Everything okay here?" Valerie turned, that brittle smile back in place. "Mr. Rourke, I was just explaining to Mrs. Lane that she's in possession of confidential material." "They're meeting minutes," Martha said. "You edited out every reference to the accessibility complaints. You can't delete evidence just because it makes you look bad." The tyrant in heel's jaw tightened. "Careful what you call evidence. Misrepresentation has consequences." "So does abuse of power," I said, stepping between them, "especially when it's already under investigation." Her tone snapped. "You think anyone's going to believe a man with a personal vendetta? You're biased, emotional, and still law enforcement," I interrupted. "Which means I understand exactly how the chain of custody works." Her nostrils flared. "You don't scare me." I smiled faintly. "Then you're not paying attention." She turned sharply toward Martha, eyes narrowing. "You think helping him will protect you? You're aligning yourself with a man under public scrutiny." Martha's voice broke slightly, but she didn't waver. "I'd rather be seen standing up than sitting quiet." Valerie took a slow breath. The officer of rules straightened her blazer, like she could iron her morality back into place. "You're both making mistakes you can't undo," she said coldly. "No," I replied. "We're fixing ones you tried to hide." She glared at me for a long moment, then turned to leave. But as she passed, she muttered, "You don't know the half of what's coming." And just like that, she was gone, heels clicking down the pavement like a countdown. Martha exhaled shakily. "I think she's scared." "She's desperate," I said. "And desperate people get dangerous." Inside Martha's house, we spread the papers across her kitchen table. Dozens of meeting notes, HOA expenditure sheets, email printouts, all scrubbed or rewritten to protect Valerie's decisions. But the patterns were there. Timestamps changed, missing attachments, financial approvals that didn't match the signatures. "This isn't just about the taser," I said quietly. "She's been covering misuse of HOA funds for months." Martha nodded. "The ramp was her tipping point. She needed a distraction." "Then we give her the opposite," I said. "Clarity." For the first time, I saw a flicker of courage replace her fear. "What do you need me to do?" "Testify," I said. "And not just about the ramp, about everything." She hesitated. "You think they'll listen to me?" "They will when the audit starts." Because the truth was, I'd already sent everything. Photos, minutes, her emails, to a contact at the Department of Housing Oversight. The review had been opened quietly that morning. Valerie Kent just didn't know it yet. When I stepped back outside, the afternoon light felt sharper. Neighbors peeked from their windows, curious but afraid to get involved. That was the power Valerie used to hold, the illusion that she couldn't be challenged. But illusions only last until the audience blinks. I looked back at Martha's house. "You did good," I said softly. "You broke the silence." Her voice followed me from the doorway. So, what happens now? I turned toward the street where the enforcer in crimson had driven away moments earlier. Now, I said, now she realizes she picked the wrong family to intimidate. And as I walked away, I could already feel it, the slow, unstoppable shift of power. Valerie Kent had ruled through fear for years, but fear, when cornered, turns on its master. She'd lit the fuse, and soon her own fire was going to burn her kingdom down. By the next morning, I knew the final act was about to begin. The emails I'd forwarded to the State Oversight Office had been acknowledged, quietly, discreetly, but that was enough. The investigation clock had started ticking, and Valerie Kent didn't know she was already standing on a legal landmine. Still, I'd learned one thing about the board chair. She never surrendered until she'd turned every weapon she had into a shield. And she had one left: public manipulation. When I stepped outside that morning, I saw her staging her redemption arc. The enforcer in crimson stood on the steps of the community hall, surrounded by 3 reporters, her crimson blazer glowing under the daylight like a war flag. A neighbor's phone was already recording. She was giving her version of the story: soft voice, perfect posture, crocodile tears. "I acted to protect residents," she said into the camera. It was an unfortunate misunderstanding that's being twisted by individuals with personal motives. The venom behind that phrase was aimed straight at me. I stood at the edge of the street, unseen by the cameras, just listening. She was good, too good. Every sentence sounded rehearsed, every emotion strategically placed. The clipboard queen wasn't talking to the media. She was talking to the HOA residents watching from their porches, the ones still afraid of losing favor. Martha texted me from across the street. "She's trying to bury it." "What now?" I typed back. "Let her. Every lie she tells today becomes evidence tomorrow." Still, my blood boiled. Watching her twist the narrative into something almost believable reminded me exactly why she'd stayed in power for so long. She wasn't just corrupt, she was charismatic. When she finally saw me, her expression didn't falter. If anything, she smiled wider. "Officer Rourke," she called out sweetly, waving as if we were old friends. "Would you like to make a statement?" The reporters turned toward me. I walked up slowly, keeping my voice calm. "Sure," I said. "Just one sentence." Every camera pointed at me. Valerie Kent tased a disabled child in a courtroom and called it community safety. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the wind stopped moving. The tyrant in heels blinked, lips parting slightly. Then she forced a laugh. "That's completely out of context." But she was done. The reporters didn't wait for her recovery. They started firing. Questions, fast, loud, relentless. Was the child harmed? Did the board authorize it? Did you file a police report afterward? Her composure cracked under the barrage. Her voice trembled. "This interview is over," she snapped, pushing past the cameras. The officer of rules stumbled slightly as her heel caught the curb. I watched her retreat, the bright red of her blazer vanishing into the dark window of her car. When she sped away, it wasn't just an exit, it was a collapse. The public armor she'd built for years had shattered in seconds. Martha joined me a few minutes later, clutching a folded piece of paper. "She left this on my porch," she said, voice trembling. I unfolded it, a formal HOA violation notice, addressed to me, dated that morning. Non-compliance with Section 19C, disorderly conduct in public. I almost laughed. She's still trying to fight paperwork with paperwork. Martha frowned. "She's unraveling. I think she knows she's cornered." I nodded. "That's when people like her get most dangerous. She'll go after reputation next." And she did. Within hours, fake community newsletters started appearing in residents' mailboxes, unsigned, printed from some cheap inkjet printer, accusing me of exploiting tragedy for attention. It didn't matter. Every move she made only confirmed guilt. The board chair was spiraling, and the world was watching. That evening, my wife, Rebecca, walked into my home office holding her phone. "You should see this," she said, turning the screen toward me. A headline blazed across the local news site: "HOA board under investigation after courtroom incident. Multiple complaints surface." Underneath it was her photo, Valerie Kent, walking briskly out of the courthouse. Reporters on her heels, expression caught mid-blink, mid-lie. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. "It's starting," I said. Rebecca nodded. And when it ends, she won't be sitting in that chair again. Outside, headlights flickered across the street. Another car had stopped in front of my house. It wasn't Valerie's. It was unmarked, gray sedan, tinted windows. A man stepped out, suit and tie, badge on his belt. He walked up, knocked once. "Detective Hollis," he said. "Department of Housing Oversight. You filed a report?" I gestured toward the living room. "I did, and you're just in time." Because the next phase wasn't about survival anymore. It was about justice. And by now, the clipboard queen had built her own noose, out of arrogance, lies, and a taser that had sparked more than just voltage. It had ignited a revolution. Detective Hollis didn't waste time. He sat at my dining table, pen tapping rhythmically against his notepad, while Rebecca laid out the printed emails and HOA statements like evidence in a courtroom. The air felt electric, tense, heavy, inevitable. Valerie Kent's name appeared in almost every document, each signature more incriminating than the last. The board chair hadn't just crossed a line. She'd redrawn it to suit her whims, and now every stroke of her pen was turning into a confession. Hollis adjusted his glasses. "You're saying she falsified financial records, misused HOA funds, and physically assaulted a child? In court?" "Yes," I said evenly. "And she's still trying to manipulate public opinion. She's been sending fake newsletters, threatening residents, and tampering with HOA documents. She's not acting like someone innocent. She's acting like someone terrified of losing control." He nodded slowly. "We've had complaints about her before. None this severe, but the pattern fits." Before he could ask another question, the faint sound of footsteps echoed outside. Rebecca tensed. I stood and walked to the front window. There she was, Valerie Kent. The enforcer in crimson was pacing in front of my driveway, phone pressed to her ear, movements sharp and erratic. Her usual elegance was gone, her hair slightly disheveled, her blazer wrinkled. She looked like a queen stripped of her crown, but still pretending to rule. "Should I call for backup?" Hollis asked quietly. I shook my head. "Not yet." I stepped outside, the night air cool against my face. The moment she saw me, her lips curled into that same bitter smile. "You think you've won?" she said, voice trembling but defiant. "No," I said calmly. "Winning isn't my goal. Justice is." The clipboard queen laughed, a high, strained sound that echoed down the quiet street. "You really believe this investigation will hold? You're underestimating how deep my connections go. The city needs me more than it needs you." I folded my arms. "You've built your empire on fear, Valerie. The thing about fear is, it only lasts until someone stops flinching." Her eyes flickered, but she doubled down. "You're a cop. You should understand power when you see it." "I do," I said, "and I know exactly what happens when people abuse it." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You ruined my reputation, my standing. Do you really think I'll let that go?" I tilted my head. "You didn't need my help ruining it. You did that the moment you aimed a taser at a child." Her face twisted, the mask finally slipping. "That girl was a disruption. The court was out of order." "No," I said quietly. "You were." The tyrant in heels stood frozen, shaking slightly. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen, and the color drained from her face. I caught a glimpse. A message preview reading, "Investigation confirmed. Board audit initiated." Her hand fell to her side. "You think this means anything?" she whispered. "Even if I go down, you'll go with me. The community will turn on you next." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Maybe, but at least I'll walk through it with integrity. Can you say the same?" For the first time, Valerie didn't respond. She just stared, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, as though realizing the one truth she'd spent her entire career avoiding. She wasn't untouchable. She spun on her heel and stormed toward her car, nearly tripping as she went. The officer of rules was unraveling, piece by piece, thread by thread. Inside, Hollis stood by the window, arms crossed. "She's in deeper than I thought," he said. "This isn't just misconduct, it's organized fraud." I nodded. "She's been rerouting maintenance funds, inflating contracts, approving expenses under fake names. You'll find it all in her transaction records." Rebecca added quietly, "And she's been threatening witnesses. My daughter's teacher got an anonymous email after testifying." Hollis sighed, jotting notes. We'll issue a warrant first thing in the morning, but you need to be careful. She's volatile. Trust me, I said, looking out the window as Valerie's car disappeared into the dark. I've dealt with volatile. The neighborhood lights flickered, porch lamps casting long shadows across the street. It was eerie, like the whole cul-de-sac was holding its breath. For years, this place had been her kingdom, but now the walls she built around her authority were closing in. I checked my phone. Dozens of new messages from neighbors had come in, people forwarding her fake newsletters, screenshots of her angry emails, even photos of her shouting at residents during a board visit that afternoon. They weren't scared anymore. They were furious. The power she'd weaponized was finally being turned against her. Rebecca placed a hand on my shoulder. You know this isn't over yet, right? I nodded. It never is, but tomorrow she answers for all of it. As I looked back toward the empty street, a single porch light flicked on at Martha Lane's house. She stepped outside, met my gaze across the distance, and gave a subtle nod. The witness was ready. And in that quiet, electric moment, I knew the battle was about to move from whispers to courtroom walls, where lies crumble under oath, and truth finally takes the stand. The enforcer in crimson could run, she could threaten, she could spin every story she wanted. But tomorrow, she wouldn't be the one writing the narrative. I would. By sunrise, the air in Willow Creek felt heavy, thick with anticipation, like the entire neighborhood knew something was about to break. The streets were quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm. Valerie Kent wasn't answering calls, not from her board, not from the residents, not even from her own attorney. The board chair who once sent 12 emails before breakfast had gone silent overnight. And silence, from someone like her, was more dangerous than noise. Detective Hollis called me at 8:13 a.m. sharp. The warrant's approved, he said. We'll serve it by noon, but I'd prefer if you stayed out of the area until we're done. I looked out the window at the HOA office across the park. If you want this to end clean, detective, you're going to want me there. She won't go quietly. He exhaled, reluctant. You're probably right, but if she provokes you, don't react. You understand? I did. But I also knew Valerie Kent never made it easy for anyone to stay calm. By 10, I was standing in front of the glass-walled HOA headquarters, the same place where she'd once banned me from attending meetings. The enforcer in crimson was already inside, pacing like a trapped animal, her heels clicking sharp and fast against the tile. Her reflection in the glass looked almost ghostly, haunted by the empire she'd built. When she saw me, she smirked faintly, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. You really think bringing the police into this makes you the hero? I didn't answer. Behind her, 2 board members sat frozen at the long table, unsure whose side they were supposed to be on. The board voted unanimously, she continued. You're barred from all community functions pending investigation. The investigation you're under? I asked flatly. The clipboard queen bristled. Watch your tone, Mr. Rourke. You're talking to a duly elected representative. Of what? I asked. Fraud, assault, or both? Her hands trembled, though she tried to hide it by rearranging papers that no longer mattered. You think this little witch hunt scares me? You're nothing without that badge. I took a slow step closer. That badge isn't what makes me dangerous, Valerie. The truth is... The door opened behind me. Detective Hollis entered with 2 uniformed officers. The sound of their boots echoed across the floor. The tyrant in heels froze mid-motion, a flicker of panic crossing her face before she plastered on a defiant smile. What's this about? Hollis spoke evenly. Valerie Kent, you're being served with a search and seizure warrant for records related to misappropriation of HOA funds, falsified documentation, and obstruction of justice. Her face went pale. You have no right. The warrant's signed by Judge Rebecca Rourke, he interrupted. The name hit her like a bullet. Her gaze snapped to me, realization dawning, and then fury. You manipulated her. You set me up. No, I said quietly. You set yourself up the moment you lied under oath. The officer of rules' breath came in shallow bursts. She turned to the other board members. Don't just sit there. Tell them this is harassment. No one moved. Not a single voice came to her defense. As the officers began collecting files and computers, Valerie's composure shattered. You think you've won? She hissed. You think humiliating me fixes your broken little life? I met her glare. This isn't about humiliation. It's about accountability. You're no better than me, she spat. You use authority to feel powerful. I use it to create order. We're the same. I took a breath, stepped closer, and whispered, "The difference is, I know when to stop." Her eyes flicked with rage. "You'll regret this." "I already did," I said. "The day you put a taser on my little girl." For the first time, her voice faltered. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. "Neither was this," I replied. The enforcer in crimson tried to steady herself, but her knees buckled slightly as Hollis read the rest of the order aloud. She was no longer the woman who once dictated the color of people's fences or fined retirees for planting the wrong flowers. She was just another name on a list of people who thought they were untouchable, until the law caught up. The officers escorted her outside. Neighbors had already gathered along the sidewalk, phones raised, whispers spreading like wildfire. Some looked shocked, others quietly satisfied. Valerie Kent's crimson blazer glowed under the daylight. Once a symbol of control, now the color of exposure. She turned her head, meeting my eyes one last time. "This isn't the end," she said, voice trembling. "It is," I said softly. "At least for you." The crowd parted as the squad car door shut behind her. The neighborhood that had once bent to her, Will now stood watching her downfall in silence. Inside the office, Hollis began boxing up evidence. "You did good," he said. I looked around at the hollow space, the echo of her rules still lingering in the air. "Not yet," I said quietly. "She's not the type to go quietly into disgrace." He frowned. "You think she's still planning something?" I nodded. "I know she is. And tomorrow, she'll make her last move." Outside, as the police convoy rolled away, a single piece of red paper fluttered loose from Valerie's confiscated folder, landing face up near my boot. It was an HOA violation notice. My address, my name, dated that morning. Even in custody, she was still trying to play the game, but this time, she was playing it from behind glass. The board meeting that evening was supposed to be routine. Budget approvals, landscaping contracts, the usual facade of suburban order. But as I stepped into the hall, every eye turned. The air buzzed with tension. The same room that once echoed with Valerie Kent's voice now felt hollow without her, like the kingdom had lost its queen. Except, she was there. The board chair sat in her usual seat at the head of the table, even though she'd been formally suspended that morning. Her crimson blazer was pressed, her hair perfect, but there was something fractured in her eyes, something unsteady. The crowd murmured, unsure if this was defiance or denial. Detective Hollis stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching carefully. The board had called an emergency public session to address community concerns. Everyone knew what that meant: damage control. The enforcer in crimson leaned forward, gripping the microphone. "Let's get one thing clear," she said, voice sharp, unshaken. "The accusations against me are exaggerated, politically motivated, and have nothing to do with the integrity of this board." Murmurs rose from the residents. A few clapped. Most stayed silent. I stayed near the aisle, arms folded. "Is that your defense, Valerie?" I asked loudly. "That it's everyone else's fault again?" Her head turned slowly, her eyes finding mine like a predator spotting movement in tall grass. "Officer Rourke," she said coolly, "your presence here is inappropriate given your personal involvement." "My personal involvement is what happens when someone tases my disabled daughter in open court," I said, my voice steady but cutting through the murmurs like a blade. The clipboard queen smirked faintly. "That's your version of events." Detective Hollis stepped forward. "Ms. Kent, let's not make this harder than it needs to be." But Valerie ignored him. She pushed a stack of papers across the table. "Here," she snapped. "Copies of financials, compliance reports, all signed. You'll find everything in order." The tyrant in heels was trying to reclaim the stage, to rewrite her downfall in real time. But Martha Lane, our conflicted witness, stood up from the front row before anyone else could respond. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice carried. "Those reports are forged." The room went dead silent. Valerie blinked. "Excuse me?" "I watched you sign those last night," Martha said, voice cracking. "You told me to backdate the entries, to hide the overcharges." She held up her phone. "I recorded everything." Gasps erupted across the hall. The crowd leaned forward. Hollis froze mid-step. Valerie's mask cracked. "You lying snake," she hissed, her voice losing its polish. "You're just as guilty." "No," Martha cut in. "I was scared. You threatened me. You told me if I didn't help, you'd ruin my mortgage approval." The officer of rules stood, trembling with fury. "You ungrateful coward," she screamed. That was it. The moment she lost the room. Every neighbor, every board member, every bystander who'd ever whispered her name now saw her for what she truly was. I stepped forward. "You're finished, Valerie. Sit down before you make it worse." She turned to me, face pale but eyes blazing. "You think this will save you? They'll turn on you next. They always do." I shook my head. "Maybe. But at least I'll walk out of here knowing my daughter sleeps safe tonight." The board chair laughed bitterly, but it came out uneven, like glass cracking. "You think you've beaten me? This community was built on my control." I looked around at the residents, people who had lived in quiet fear for years, afraid of her. Fines, her emails, her power. One by one, they stood. First Martha, then an elderly man near the back, then another woman, then 10 more. "You don't control anything anymore," I said. "They do." Hollis approached her slowly, pulling a folded paper from his jacket. "Ms. Kent," he said, "you're hereby removed from your position as acting board chair under Section 12B of the Association Charter. You're also facing new charges, witness intimidation and fraud." Her face went blank. "You can't do this." But they already had. The crowd broke into murmurs as Hollis escorted her out. As Valerie Kent passed me, she stopped, just for a moment. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You think you're the hero. You're not. You're just another man who needed a villain." I met her stare. "No, I'm a father who needed justice." The enforcer in crimson said nothing. For the first time, she looked small. She turned away and walked out through the double doors, the sound of her heels fading until there was only silence. When the doors shut, the residents exhaled collectively, like the entire neighborhood had been holding its breath for years. Martha turned toward me, tears forming. "It's over?" she whispered. "Not yet," I said softly, looking at the chair where Valerie had sat moments ago. Her empty seat still radiated tension, like a ghost of authority refusing to die. "There's one last thing she'll try before this is done." And I was right, because in her world, power never surrendered. It retaliated, and I could feel it already, brewing behind that calm, suffocating silence. By dawn, the neighborhood was changed. The storm had broken, and all that remained were the cracks, the kind that show what people are really made of. The banners Valerie Kent once made residents hang for Community Unity Day still fluttered across the cul-de-sac, faded and ironic under the pale light. The board chair was gone, escorted from the previous night's meeting in disgrace. But her presence lingered like the aftertaste of something bitter. Her crimson heels, her echoing orders, her emails that began with "per HOA policy." All of it haunted the quiet. I sat on my porch with a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. My daughter slept inside, her tiny breathing steady and safe for the first time in weeks. My wife, Judge Rebecca Rourke, was in the kitchen reviewing the official removal documents Hollis had dropped off an hour ago. The last signatures would make it final. Valerie Kent was stripped of every ounce of authority she once wielded like a weapon. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wouldn't go quietly. The phone buzzed on the table beside me. No name, just a local number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice slithered through the speaker, calm, controlled, dangerous. "You think this ends with me?" The enforcer in crimson still sounded defiant, but beneath it, exhaustion crept in. "You've embarrassed me, destroyed my career. But you forget, I built that community. You'll never lead them the way I did." "I don't want to lead them," I said, keeping my tone measured. "I just want them free." She laughed softly, hollow and venomous. "You call this freedom? Without structure, without rules, these people will eat each other alive. You'll see, chaos always needs a queen." I let the silence stretch, letting her words hang like smoke in the air. "You're wrong," I said finally. "Real order doesn't come from control. It comes from accountability." "You sound just like your wife," she sneered. "Tell her the next time she swings that gavel, she should remember. Judges fall too." That was the moment I realized. She wasn't just broken. She was still scheming, even from the ground. Before I could respond, she hung up. The clipboard queen had made her last move, a threat disguised as prophecy. A few hours later, I arrived at City Hall for the official signing of the board's dissolution vote. The room buzzed with reporters, neighbors, and a handful of former board members who'd suddenly found their voices now that Valerie's grip was gone. Martha Lane sat beside me, hands folded, calm for the first time in months. Detective Hollis stood at the podium, reading the final report. Effective immediately, the Willow Creek Homeowners Association is placed under city supervision pending reorganization. Charges against Valerie Kent include fraud, assault, witness intimidation, and falsification of records. Whispers rippled through the crowd. I glanced toward the doors, half expecting her to burst through, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But she didn't. The tyrant in heels had finally been dethroned. As the papers were signed, a soft cheer rose from the residents. For years, fear had held them captive, fear of letters, fines, and her voice echoing through every neighborhood meeting. Now they stood taller, freer. When it was over, Martha turned to me. "She called you, didn't she?" I hesitated. "Yeah." "What did she say?" "That I'd never lead them the way she did." Martha smiled faintly. "Good. That means you're doing it right." Outside, the sun burned through the gray morning haze. The neighborhood didn't look perfect anymore. The fences were uneven, the lawns mismatched, the once mandatory flower beds wilting. But for the first time, it felt real. Rebecca joined me on the steps, hands slipping into mine. "You did it," she said softly. "No," I said, watching kids ride bikes where HOA safety codes once banned them. "We did." As I looked across the street, I saw a "for sale" sign where Valerie Kent's car used to be parked. The property was vacant, its blinds drawn, its perfection now an empty shell. The neighbors whispered she'd taken a plea deal. Others said she'd left town. Maybe both were true. But one thing was certain: the officer of rules would never rule again. Rebecca nudged me gently. "You know," she said, "this might make a great story for your precinct newsletter." I chuckled. "I doubt they print stories about HOA tyrants." "Then make them," she said, smiling. "People need to know what happens when good men stand up." I looked down at my daughter's wheelchair parked beside the steps, the little tassels fluttering in the breeze. My throat tightened. "Yeah," I whispered. "They do." A light wind swept through the street, rustling the leaves that Valerie once ordered trimmed to a uniform height. They danced freely now, uneven and untamed, just like the people who live beneath them. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Willow Creek felt alive again. And if you've ever stood your ground when someone tried to break you, subscribe and share your story below. I want to hear where and tell where you're watching from. Because this was more than revenge. It was restoration. It was proof that even in the most controlled neighborhoods, truth finds a way through the cracks. The crimson rain had ended, and all that remained was peace.